Okay, so for the next session, we have Robbie from DornerWorks talking about improving the embedded DevOps with the SEL4 VMM. And over to you.
Thank you. So if you're not that familiar with DevOps or DevSecOps, it's really about what does your development loop look like in terms of development, testing, fixing bugs, deployment, testing on your target, fixing bugs, redeploying, and how you continuously keep doing that. And you know, some newer tools like containers really can help make that an easier process. It's fairly difficult to redeploy an application for an OS. Some OSs handle it better than others. Obviously, SEL4, which isn't really built for dynamic systems, doesn't handle it very well. Most RTOSs don't handle it very well. And so it can be quite a headache for people who have fielded systems to update their applications that are actually running on their systems. So that prevents and delays things like security bug fixes. It delays things like new features, and that can cause quite a headache. And so one thing is that containers can help with that. And just a little bit of background on containers, if you're not that familiar, is it's really a way of packaging software execution code along with the required OS libraries. And so they're built to run with a container engine. If you're familiar, Docker's one, Kubernetes is one. And that runs on top of the OS and uses the OS to facilitate how it can run its applications. And this provides a very small level of isolation, but not one that you would ever want to use for anyone who has any sort of isolation requirements. It's kind of more just like extra sandboxing of processes, really. So containers are built from images, and these images are built up from read-only layers. What that does is it actually makes it really easy to pull in a lower stack layer and build on top of it. So this makes it really easy to iterate designs. It makes it really easy to reuse designs, and really prototype things incredibly quickly. One nice thing about it is that there is actually a standard for container images. And as long as your container engine uses that specification, you can actually run like containers that were built for Docker on top of Kubernetes and vice versa. So that's a pretty nice feature that's been in development for a while now. And so how does this really apply to the embedded DevSecOps? So, you know, going through that loop, this really helps you improve deployment and portability, just because all you really have to do is replace one container image for another one, a newer one, or even if you're just cycling out features, you know, you can completely swap one for another one. And, you know, doesn't really require rebuild of anything. It doesn't require reboot of anything, so you can do live updates. And another main benefit is that it allows you to do local testing and prototyping. So you can shorten your development time by doing a whole bunch of prototyping where you can develop your applications in isolation. You can then use container orchestration to hook them up together still on your host machine and run through your tests. And doing that, you should hopefully be able to discover a bunch of the issues you might have, both in terms of the application itself, as well as integrating all your applications together. And then you get to the point where you actually deploy it on your target and then do kind of more final testing. Obviously, you keep going in a loop like that because you're never, ever really done testing. But you know, it makes that loop tighter, which saves you time in terms of not needing to deploy every time you want to test. And then it actually has near native performance just because of the way that it utilizes the OS infrastructure. And so, you know, you're not really worried about adding on extra like network latency issues or anything like that. So that's a big pro there. And then I think one of the things that really helps is with prototyping. Like I was saying, you know, you use lower level images that already exist and you build on top of them. And so there's a huge library. If you've ever been a Docker hub, you know, there's a huge library of container images that are already out there. You can pull them, you can create your own Docker files that use those as a starting point. And so when you want like a web server, you just go and you run a single command line and you can get Nginx or you can get Apache and you have it installed in like 1 minute, right? That makes it super easy to just start chucking different things together, orchestrate them into a system, and really prototype things out. And then, like I said, it's more secure isolation than just apps on Linux as processes, but, you know, marginally so. But, you know, the real benefit is then when you start utilizing it in tandem with virtualization, especially on SEL4. And so containers by themselves are not going to really work in a mixed criticality system. However, what you can do is have a virtual machine per criticality level. And within each one of those, you can decide whether or not you're doing it, but you can run a Docker engine or a container engine and then run containers on top of that. So then you have an idea of you're getting your isolation between criticality levels while still getting the DevOps benefits of using containers. And I will say we've been prototyping this out, and on top of the CamKeys VM on a ZC102, we are able to run a container image on a Linux guest, and we've been able to run containers on it and swap them out. And I guess, you know, a caveat to that is that that current configuration uses about 1 gigabyte of RAM just to support the container engine. So you're running the kernel, the RAM disk, and then just the rest of that RAM is just to run the container engine. So that's kind of like our first step for things that we want to do next is just start making some improvements towards what we have today. And so, you know, a couple options to do that. A is, you know, trying out some more lightweight approaches. There's some engines that are targeted for embedded devices like Balena. That's an option. There's also Linux Kit, which kind of takes an approach of really trying to take a more fine-grained control of what services you're actually building into your kernel, and only building just those. So that's something we want to explore, but haven't delved into much. So there's just optimization. I think another thing that we can do would be to the centralized VMM point. We need VirtIO block, right? So if you can stomach a gig of your RAM going away to just running the VM and the container engine, you're more likely to be able to do that if your container images can live on persistent storage, right? But that's really only useful if you have a way to kind of you know, divvy up your persistent storage that you already have. You're likely not going to be having boards where you have like 6 different SATA controllers or eMMC, right? You're going to get like one, and you're going to be happy with it or not. So some other approaches, I think, that are kind of an alternative to what we're doing right now is that you could try to run containers directly on SEL4. And that would be, you know, as a component. There's a lot of problems with that, and I'd say the biggest one is that we don't have a real OS, and so the container engine is reliant on a lot of functionality that an OS can provide. You can kind of look at that container engine spec, and you can see like, here's all the features that you can do. And if you look at like Linux, it's like all of them. And then if you look at like Windows, you know, it doesn't quite provide all the same things. So it's a subset. Like if you tried to port a container engine to SEL4 today, you'd maybe get like one box. And so, you know, I think like talking about porting a container on top of SEL4 components is really putting the horse before the cart, because you just need so much more OS infrastructure to be able to support that, right? You need to be already comfortable building apps like you would on another OS, building Linux apps, building Windows apps, to be able to recognize how to then containerize them, right? Then I think another approach would be to kind of take the same overall DevSecOps approach, but also adding unikernels to your tool belt. I think it provides a lot of the same types of improvements to DevSecOps that containers does, such that a lot of unikernels you can configure for different backends and then build on those. So if you look at an example like Mirage OS, that can run on top of Unix, but then also it can run as a VM on top of Xen, right? And it's just kind of a configuration, and then it'll grab all the different libs you need for whatever backend you're choosing and build that up. So, you know, you could take that and you could build a backend support in for like SEL4 to run as a VM. And so from that, you get similar benefits where you can build that on a Unix system as your host and orchestrate multiple unikernels together and hook them up with whatever, and you can prototype and test on a host machine and do that iterative process before you then deploy. And then, you know, it's going to rely a bit more on better implementation of unikernel deployment tools. You know, there's already a bunch of different orchestration tools for containers, so that would have to catch up. And then I think kind of one of the other cons to it is it doesn't have that big library, right? You don't see a lot of you know, example unikernel implementations, and so I think building up like a recipe or like a cookbook, if not even ones that you could just pull down that already do what you want, you know, a cookbook would be a great place to start to kind of bridge that gap between what container engines provide versus what you can do with a unikernel. But I mean, the unikernel also has pretty nice benefits too of, you know, it's going to be the smallest possible thing that you need to actually run that application. So it's really going to look much more like microservices than you'll see out of these big VMs with the container engines, right? And so, you know, you'll be able to say like deploy app as virtual machine, and it's going to be on a much smaller order of magnitude of RAM utilization. And that is all I wanted to throw out to you guys. So curious about what your thoughts are on that. If you have any DevSecOps experience, or if anyone else has been looking into these things, especially unikernels. I'm really interested in unikernels, but you know, it's hard to know where to start because they're so not well developed and defined. And there's a number of offerings, but you know, each one seems to really only target like a couple backends, and so it's hard to know where to start looking for porting one.
So it might be useful as with the interest in unikernel as a baseline. Some of the customers we've been working with around this are using containers with various flavors of Linux, whether that's Red Hat or Petalinux or other types of Linux out there. And so with that kind of as a accepted baseline use of containers, it's unikernel is something of interest from a DornerWorks perspective. But others experience with DevSecOps or different types of ways that you're approaching that?
So maybe I can say from our perspective, we have not seen this as a problem so far because customers want a VM for whatever they want to run in the VM. So we give them the VM. And the rest is their problem. And we are quite happy because we can leave it to them. They get what they want. So it seems you are one stage ahead already. And you have figured out the customers need more or should ask for more. Or how did you come into this? I mean, technology-wise, it seems an interesting thing. Are your customers really pulling Docker images nowadays and not really building their VM? They just download their VM.
I'll say something and then interested in Robbie's perspective. So to your question, this has really been a market pull thing for us in that, and I look at kind of IT or enterprise world that was doing virtualization long before that came to kind of DornerWorks. Maybe 8-9 years ago, we took virtualization and started using that for embedded systems and customers, and that's grown significantly. And I think similarly, containers has been used in IT or enterprise world for quite some time now. Now suddenly we have embedded customers that are saying we are developing systems and have to support containers. And so that was some of the dynamic market pull or customer interest to your question, Axel, of we started looking at DevSecOps because they want a way to be able to do the continuous integration and to be able to bring additional agility or responsiveness for deployment of software, whether that's a patch or capabilities. Robbie, would you say it differently or what?
Well, I guess maybe the distinction that I think might be helpful is that it's not really like customers that we're working with right now where we're delivering already a virtualized system that is towards their requirements for a new solution. A lot of it's being driven by customers who have equipment that's been fielded and has software running on it that's been running for years. And one of their major pain points is deployment onto already fielded systems. And so they're looking both about what does retrofit look like in terms of how do they make it easier for the systems that are currently fielded. Also, how do they make it easier for any future systems that they develop? And so this is kind of like, what is a way that this can be addressed with technology we have now onto fielded systems that we have now? And so this is kind of an approach to that. And our customers have expressed interest specifically in container solutions.
So just a question on the unikernel adoption thing. Is there any tools that actually can help you maybe build just what you need and try to deploy it? Or is that just, theory at this point? Because I'm not aware of it.
Like there are unikernels out there and they target specific, targets that they run on. Like I said, like Mirage OS is an example that I've played around with, right? And you can build it for KVM, you can build it for Unix, you can build it for Zen, right? And so they have like some tutorials, and they have a load of libraries, which aren't documented super well. So it's really just each unikernel kind of has its own tool chain essentially set up to do configuring, do building, but then like app development is still mostly really up to you to just write what you want it to do. But there's no real like convergence on anything yet, like you would see with the Docker engine. There are some things that are attempting to be a general back end for unikernels. So one that Mirage OS ties into is called, I believe it's Solo 5. And I think that's a pretty interesting idea, because if you could, and that one supports a couple unikernels. So you can kind of like grab your flavor of unikernel, and then Solo 5 has been ported to a number of things. And so you could kind of grab your flavor of unikernel, you can grab your target that you're interested in, and kind of, you know, orchestrate those together to build specifically what you need, both for testing as well as deployment. So I think they're like starting to be created, but really it's still early days with unikernels.
Just to add on the point where you mentioned, you know, the interest in the container. Once I was presenting stuff about SEL4, and then someone came and said, "Cool, does it run container?" You know, that was basically, yeah, that was the end of the discussion, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I find that when people ask that, they don't actually understand what they're asking.
Oh no, he worked with SL4, so he asked that kind of jokingly, because he knew.
Oh, gotcha.
You know, so yeah.
Okay, anybody else? I have to admit, I heard this joke also several times, and I'm not so sure if there's really an expectation. How do I get my set of libraries on top of SL4 deployed? Can't we use containers? And we say we don't want, but why? Actually, why not? What is the alternative? You can offer Chemkis.
Yeah. All right, shorter one, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, if there are no further questions or comments, then I think we're then going to close the session and can have a break. And then Sebastian will be next presenting on how to teach SL4 at university.
Thank you.